10th place. And opening our top 10 is Vasily Surikov and his painting Boyarynya Morozova. It began with a dispute about traditional values. In the mid-17th century, Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich aimed to rule Byzantium, as Constantinople was the spiritual center of the Russian Church, though it was in Greece. However, the church customs of the Greeks were a bit different from those of the Russians, and to make them uniform, the Tsar, together with Patriarch Nikon, decided to carry out a church reform and unification. It might sound funny to you now, but the reform was about the fact that, according to the new rules, believers were supposed to bow at the waist instead of to the floor. Processions started moving counterclockwise, and importantly, the sign of the cross was now made with 3 fingers instead of 2. Such bold and even outrageous changes could not leave the most conservative part of the Orthodox community indifferent, and a schism occurred in the church. However, Nikon and the Tsar quickly labeled all schismatics, later called Old Believers, as heretics and anathematized them to suppress any resistance to the Tsar's dream. The Old Believers were stubborn, and many refused to accept the changes, or as they saw it, the betrayal of the Lord, even under threat of death. Jerusalem, Jerusalem. It was this schism and tragic moment in Russian history that Vasily Surikov, who was born in Siberia and had heard many stories about the Old Believers, decided to portray. About Boyarynya Morozova, who along with her sister rejected the new customs. What happened as a result? She was shackled, thrown into a pit, then sent to the Chudov monastery, where she died without betraying herself. Exhausted and hungry on the way, but unbroken, fanaticism and fire in her eyes. The noble woman, who gave up an estate of 8,000 souls for her faith, raises her hand in the 2-fingered sign, blessing those who, like her, remained loyal to the old faith. Surikov was one of the Petrov-Vodkin Russian revolutionaries in art. Check out my video about the Petrov-Vodkin, I'll leave a link in the description. He worked on the painting for 3 years, from 1884 to 1887. This monumental canvas was challenging for him and debuted at the Petrov-Vodkin exhibition, instantly attracting public and critical attention for its detail and drama. Surikov searched for a model for Morozova for a long time. He had everything ready. The model was aesthetic, bloodless, with large sunken eyes from hunger, but he just couldn't find the right type. The prototype for Morozova was Surikov's aunt, Avdotia Vasilyevna Targoshina. Look at the people. The sleigh divides them into 2 groups. Some laugh and rejoice, while others seem oppressed and confused. On the right side, we see people whose faces show despair and fear. These are the ones who want to stay loyal to old traditions but are afraid. Because if anyone is going to cry to the lady, it's them. And only the holy fool who was forgiven everything in Russes dares to respond to her with a 2-fingered blessing. To the left of Seni, we see satisfied laughing followers of the new faith, rejoicing at the fall of the once formidable landowner. But their faces look more like the snouts of gluttonous devils, spewing filthy curses at the one they have defeated but not broken. It's clear whose side Surikov is on. This is an incredibly dramatic and vivid painting, which rightfully takes its place in our ranking. The painting can be seen at the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. 9th place, Ivan Shishkin, Morning in a Pine Forest. Many people in the Soviet Union saw this painting daily. Soviet industry made many products with it, including candies, carpets, and reproductions. I had a carpet with this scene above my bed. That's why I am very familiar with even the smallest corner of this painting, which I looked at every day. Shishkin painted the picture in 1889, and it was also first shown at the Petrov-Vodkin exhibition. While most know the painting as Shishkin's, it was actually made by 2 artists. Shishkin was an unmatched landscape artist with a remarkable talent for depicting foliage, fields, trees, and sunlight through the crowns so realistically you feel compelled to reach out and touch them. And it seems that the honey-colored shade smells like pine cones. The idea for the composition came from Konstantin Savitsky and was originally called Bear Family in the Forest. Shishkin made the sketch, while Savitsky painted the bears. Here, look, a sketch. After the exhibition, Morozov bought the painting for 4,000 rubles, which equals about 2.5 million rubles today. 1,000 of that went to Savitsky, which is 25%. Initially, the painting had 2 names, as expected. However, after purchasing it, Morozov removed Savitsky's name. So as not to compromise Shishkin's skill, that's why to this day, it's only known as Shishkin's work. Adding the bears gave the painting a storyline. At the exhibition, visitors eagerly examined it, studying the plot and the bear cubs' personalities. This highly unusual technique for Shishkin was justified, though it overshadowed the artist's true brushwork finesse. Notice how precisely the tree trunks are depicted, but the most interesting part awaits us in the upper right corner of the painting, where we see an opening. And here, the light, bursting into the darkness of the pine forest, illuminates the foliage of the trees, and Shishkin applies these patches of light with such fantastic mastery as only he could. Every blade of grass is painted in detail. Every branch, crooked and covered with moss, leaves not the slightest doubt about its authenticity, not a hint of falsehood, only remarkable sharpness of vision and an incredible sense of color. The bear cubs addition brought liveliness to the painting and made it the artist's most famous work. Yes, perhaps the most popular, but no less charming for that, you have to agree, and you can see it at the Tretyakov Gallery. 8th place, Ivan Aivazovsky, The Ninth Wave. The Ninth Wave is Ivan Aivazovsky's most celebrated painting. It's enormous, measuring 3 by 2 meters. The artist painted it in 1850 at a time when neither the Impressionists nor the Peredvizhniki, who changed the very style of painting, were even being talked about. At that time, academicism reigned supreme, and the main criterion for the quality of paintings was their likeness and realism. And the most difficult object, a substance that is almost impossible to capture, is water. This is the year 1850 photography had just appeared, but it hadn't reached Russia yet. It's impossible to stop the sea waves, so artists had to spend hours watching the ever-changing surface of the sea to catch the patterns, the waves, shadows, highlights, foam, and the transparency of the water. Not all artists were able to capture water in the end, but Aivazovsky managed to grasp, experiment with, and perfect his incredible technique. Without false modesty, he was the world's best marine artist. For comparison, let me show you a work by the great William Turner, the British marine artist who died in 1851. It's magnificent, but look, even though his sea looks just as dramatic, it's painted in a completely different way. Both artists painted from memory. At that time, all paintings were made in studios. Because paints were mixed right on the spot and dried quickly, and there was no convenient way to transport them. Soon, lead and then aluminum paint tubes appeared, sparking the Impressionist revolution. For more, watch the Impressionism video linked in the description. For now, artists could only make rough sketches outdoors, but they had to keep the whole painting in their minds. Not just copying what you see, but pulling each scene out of your imagination piece by piece. And while artists always had models at their disposal for heroic or mythological paintings, you can't invite the sea into your studio or make it pose for you. That's why it's so impressive how realistically Aivazovsky depicts water he can't even see. He wrote, "The living elements movement eludes the brush." It's impossible to paint lightning, wind gusts, or waves from life. A painting's subject forms in my memory the way a poem's subject forms for a poet. Look, we could easily mistake the ninth wave for a photograph. Notice what colors Aivazovsky uses. We've seen exactly the same ones when we looked at the raging sea. He adds drama to the painting by depicting a group of people clinging to the remains of a mast after a shipwreck. A huge wave is crashing down on them, the very same deadly ninth wave from Russian legends, which only the luckiest can survive. But painting waves is one thing. It's much harder to convey the translucency of seawater. And Aivazovsky adds a rising sun to the painting, killing two birds with one stone. The sun symbolizes hope for sailors, creating expectations of rescue and adding emotion to the story. But at the same time, it's an artistic technique that allows the artist to showcase his unmatched virtuoso skill by showing how the sun shines through the tall wave. We notice the water's transparency in every wave, each one unique. Observe how the foam and streams from the mast are painted. It's truly inimitable. The painting is at the Russian Museum in St. Petersburg. Visit if you can. 7th place, Kuzma Petrov-Vodkin, Bathing of a Red Horse. This painting, created by Petrov-Vodkin in 1912, still gives rise to countless interpretations. Some say it is evidence of the artist's prophetic gift, who foresaw the revolution that would come 5 years later. Others suggest that it is an image of Russia itself, or even its bloody fate. But I'll tell you another story, which in my opinion is the most credible. 1912. It was a period of artistic exploration. The most advanced artistic ideas came from France, where the world was being conquered by Cubism, Braque and Picasso. Matisse and his Fauvism, with the impossible colors of objects, became almost cult-like. Artists of this era tirelessly explored themselves, experimenting with color, form, and ideas. The main art idea of Petrov-Vodkin was spherical perspective, a kind of lens, a fisheye effect, a distortion of space, which is exactly what we see in the painting. The curved shoreline and the horse's movement in the background emphasize it. His second idea was to use basic colors, blue, red, and yellow. The artist felt only these colors could connect with the viewer as they represent basic categories of existence. Early sketches of the painting included another person holding the horse's reins, but Petrov-Vodkin removed him in the final version. According to Petrov-Vodkin's student Sergei Kalmykov, he himself was the model for the painting, although the artist claimed that the model was his nephew. And now you will understand why they disagree on this. When the painting was first shown to the public, it made a stunning impression. Its large size, 1.5 by 2 meters, combined with the bright red spot of the horse in the center. It drew everyone's attention. People argued angrily, claiming horses of that color don't exist. Petrov-Vodkin said he got the idea from Russian icons. However, we know that a year before the painting, in 1911, that very student of his who claims to have been the model painted this picture, and the teacher could not have missed it. Therefore, I, like some art historians, tend to think that the idea of the bright red color of the horse, which made the painting shine, was borrowed by the artist Vodkin over time. After the exhibition, the painting went to Sweden, where Petrov-Vodkin won an award for it. But then, the First World Revolution broke out, and the painting returned to Russia only in 1950 and was soon transferred to the collection of the Tretyakov Gallery, where you can see it today. 6th place, Ivan Kramskoy, The Unknown Woman. And in 6th place, we have the quite well-known Unknown Woman by Ivan Kramskoy, painted by him in 1883. Debates over this painting have continued since its debut at the 11th Peredvizhniki exhibition by Kramskoy. He was the leader of the Peredvizhniki movement, which aimed to depict the real, true life of Russia without embellishment in all its forms. Kramskoy, known for portraits, aimed to depict the most notable Russian figures of the 19th century within the movement. He is the author of the famous portrait of Lev Tolstoy, as well as portraits of Tretyakov, Nekrasov, and Empress Maria Fyodorovna. That's why the portrait of an unknown woman amazed his contemporaries. Well, surely someone as great as Kramskoy wouldn't have painted just anyone. This sparked a wave of rumors. Some said it was a peasant woman in disguise, others claimed it was an unknown noblewoman. But Kramskoy himself never gave the slightest hint about the identity of the woman depicted in the portrait. However, there is another known sketch where we see the same woman, only depicted a bit more realistically, yet sitting in the same pose and with the same ambiguous expression on her face. It is precisely this expression, the interpretation of which has sparked debates among many critics, that elevated the portrait, making it Kramskoy's most famous work. Some critics called her a courtesan in a carriage, others a precious camellia, and still others one of the fiends. The painting depicts a woman in a carriage on Nevsky Prospect, dressed in the latest fashion of 1883. She is wearing a fashionable Francis hat, Swedish gloves, and a Skobelev coat. And it is this ultra-fashionableness that tells us she is not a woman from high society, where the pursuit of fashion was considered improper and unworthy. The young woman sits in the carriage looking down at us, leaving us puzzled as we try to interpret her expression and half smile. Is it arrogance, sadness, or pride? She gives off the same sense of uncertainty as the Mona Lisa, making us wonder who she is, this unknown woman. But now I'll show you one detail that will help you understand the woman's feelings. And what was Kramskoy trying to tell us? I noticed this when I was at the Tretyakov Gallery, and this tiny detail amazed me. I'm going to zoom in on the painting, and you'll notice a white brush stroke under the heroine's eye, signaling impending tears. And suddenly everything falls into place, and we see sadness, loneliness, a little clue hidden in the corner of the unknown woman's eye, left for us by Kramskoy. That's why I always say, you need to see paintings in person, and right now you can at the Tretyakov Gallery. 5th place, Kuindzhi, Moonlit Night on the Dnieper. This unique magical painting caused an unprecedented stir in St. Petersburg, unlike anything Russia had seen before. In 1879, a year before its founding, Kuindzhi left the Peredvizhniki society after a colleague secretly wrote a critical article about him. Unable to tolerate this, the artist began painting Moonlit Night on the Dnieper in 1880. Kuindzhi's idea for the painting was so unique that he invited friends during its creation to appreciate it. Turgenev was the first to see the painting and spoke about it with great enthusiasm. At one of the gatherings to Grand Duke Konstantin Konstantinovich, the cousin of the emperor. Intrigued by the writer's story, the Grand Duke visited the artist's studio to see it and was so impressed that he immediately offered to buy it. When asked the price, Kuindzhi did not recognize the emperor's brother, so he asked, "Why do you need it? You won't buy it anyway, it's expensive." But Konstantin Konstantinovich insisted, and the artist named a fantastically high price of 5,000 rubles, about 4 million in today's money. The Grand Duke said, "I'll take it." While the painting was being completed, it was viewed by poet Yakov Polonsky, chemist Dmitry Mendeleev, and artist Ivan Kramskoy. Everyone was amazed, and rumors about the painting spread throughout St. Petersburg, preparing the public for its triumphant debut. And it was arranged brilliantly. The Grand Duke organized a separate exhibition just for it, something unprecedented. An exhibition for a single painting was unheard of. It was too risky and too expensive. Konstantin Konstantinovich was so proud he went all in. The artist drew the curtains, painted the walls black, and directed a lamp's light onto the painting. And that enhanced the effect the painting produced even more. It created the impression that it was glowing from within. The audience went wild. Nevsky was packed with carriages and spectators who stood in crazy lines just to get a look at it. They examined it and couldn't believe it. Many thought there was a hidden light source behind it. What we would now call a neon effect or acid colors was tried for the first time in the world. It was Kuindzhi who specifically developed a special palette for the painting. The painting depicts the Dnipro at night. Its apparent simplicity and conciseness actually clear the space and set the accents, focusing our attention on the moon and its reflection. The contrast of black and green, placed on a black wall, created the effect as if the viewer is looking into a dark night window, beyond which a calm, sleepy river flows, and dark clouds drift across the night sky. But the black in the painting is not completely black. We can make out the details just as we would if we were sitting by the window overlooking the Dnipro at night. An amazing effect that you can see for yourself at the Russian Museum in St. Petersburg. Fourth place, Mikhail Vrubel, The Swan Princess. In 1831, Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin wrote his famous fairy tale about Tsar Sultan, in which the evil sisters deceitfully cast the young prince and his mother, their own sister, into a barrel and send them to certain death on the open sea to get them out of the way. The barrel washes ashore on an island where the now-grown prince meets the swan princess of heavenly beauty. With her help, he builds a magnificent palace, becomes a powerful ruler, and soon reunites with his deceived father, who comes to see the new wealthy kingdom nearby. 70 years later, in 1900, Sava Morozov's private opera staged an opera of the same name with Rimsky-Korsakov's music, featuring Nadezhda Zabela Vrubel as the Swan Princess, wife of Mikhail Vrubel. He also created all the stage decorations for the performance in his very distinctive, unique style. Vrubel is inspired to paint a picture based on this fairy tale. He spends a long time considering a model, but ultimately doesn't choose anyone, not even his wife. According to his idea, this character needs an image that is entirely fairy tale-like, unreal, and elevated. Such faces aren't real, he gets to work. Several preliminary sketches for this painting reveal the artist's thought process. The painting itself is perhaps one of the most delicate and touching works by Russian artists, even considering that it depicts a fairy tale scene. The painting shows the Tsarevna in a half-turn, wrapped in feathers that turn into clothing, and in some places into seafoam. The Tsarevna's gentle face is marked by strikingly large eyes, making her look both captivating and dreamily elusive. Broad palette knife strokes give the Tsarevna's clothing a dynamic look, making it resemble feathers or water. This stunning masterpiece was quickly bought by Tretyakov and placed in the Tretyakov Gallery in 1910, where it remains on display today. Third place, Alexei Savrasov, The Rooks Have Come Back, and we've reached the top 3 most famous paintings. This painting instantly reminds me of school and those unbearably boring essays on Russian artists. Back then, I understood about as much about art as my cat Anfisa did. The teacher's request to be moved by a rather dull landscape, at least as I saw it then, was impossible to meet. Back then, I knew almost nothing compared to what I'll tell you now. Savrasov painted the picture in 1871 and first showed it to the public at the very first Peredvizhniki exhibition, where it became the star. As you can see, the Peredvizhniki had a colossal influence on Russian painting. Don't forget to watch the video about them on my channel. Unfortunately, the painting was preceded by sad events. Shortly after her birth, the artist's daughter died, and Savrasov took the loss very hard. He chose to retreat with his family to a quiet place, waiting it out and focusing on healing painting together. There is still no clear explanation of how the artist came to Malvitino, now Susanino. There is a theory that he simply went with an unfamiliar peasant, but to me, it seems unconvincing. However, researcher geographers claim that on the spot where Savrasov painted his study, there used to be a 3-story house belonging to the Hatter Chichagov. Apparently, the artist got acquainted with him and came to visit him, or simply rented a room from him during his period of seclusion. This idea is confirmed by another detail, which I will talk about later. The painting shows several birch trees, including one that's badly bent and a nearby stump. The snow hasn't melted, but has already darkened. The low spring sun casts long blue shadows from the trees. Nature is still asleep, bare, chilled and tired after the long winter. But even without looking closely at the painting, we can see that the earliest messengers of new life have already appeared, the Rooks, new life and perhaps new hope, which the artist needed so much after his loss. This nearly monochromatic painting is surprisingly harmonious and balanced. The foreground trees are balanced by the church in the background, modeled after the Church of the Resurrection of Christ in Susanino. Here is another confirmation that Savrasov painted the picture in Shaposhnik's house. Look, the foreground is painted in such a way that it's as if we're looking almost from the ground, but the horizon in the background is too high. From this position, we wouldn't be able to see it. Most likely, the artist painted the picture in 2 stages, the foreground from the porch of the house and the background from the balcony on the 3rd floor of that very same Chichagov's house. Savrasov broadened the perspective by adding a dark contrasting strip of awakening earth in the painting's center. The painting immediately received enthusiastic reviews and was purchased from the artist by Tretyakov for 600 rubles, which is about 360,000 in today's money. Tretyakov was often accused of buying masterpieces for next to nothing. Usually, he offered no more than 500 rubles for a painting. The royal family liked the painting so much that Empress Maria Alexandrovna had the artist make a replica in 1872. He made several more replicas, but the main painting eventually went to the Tretyakov Gallery. Go and take a look if you get the chance. Second place, Kazimir Malevich's Black Square. I know many of you dislike this painting, but we're ranking the most famous paintings. Black Square could be considered the most famous not just in Russia but worldwide. But it seemed to me that this would be unfair to our leader. Be sure to wait for him. Malevich, an extremely enterprising and sharp artist who was rejected by the Academy 3 times, had an epiphany in 1914. See my video for the full story about the Black Square, it's fascinating. Malevich was already quite well known because he was constantly searching and generating one idea after another. As you already know from Petrov-Vodkin's painting, this was a time of bold experiments in painting, and every ambitious artist dreamed of inventing and creating their own direction in art. Their own ism. But to do that, you had to be the first. Art had started considering abstractions, and Kandinsky made the first in 1910. Piet Mondrian also began moving toward non-objective art, but painting still depicted objects that really existed in the world, experimenting with the manner of depicting them, but not daring to abandon objectivity itself. No one had thought to take the final step toward non-objectivity. Before Malevich, the Black Square came to Malevich after he participated in the opera Victory Over the Sun, for which he made the stage decorations. The idea was that man with a capital M is the crown of nature and the conqueror, and in order to assert his power over the universe, he must defeat the sun. And as an object that most starkly contrasts with the round and yellow sun, they came up with the black square as a form that is as artificial as possible and does not exist in the world, as a symbol of human activity. This idea caught Malevich's attention. He decided that this was exactly what was needed to put the final point in art and create a painting that depicts nothing. A form, the most unnatural possible, that only a human artist can create. And he paints his black square and comes up with an entire theory, which he calls suprematism, becoming the first artist in the world to completely abandon objectivity, reducing painting to zero. If you ask me what's so special about the black square, I'll tell you, nothing. It's just a black square. And although he wasn't the first in painting, Malevich was the first to proclaim complete and absolute non-objectivity with its help. In his opinion, it nullified any aesthetics and, as he believed, put a bold period or a square on the grave of old art. He was mistaken in this, but the black square is perhaps the most famous painting by a Russian artist abroad. It hangs in the new Tretyakov gallery. Take a look, but don't stare. There's no cosmos or night there. And in first place, Mikhail Vrubel's Demon Seated. And in first place, according to all surveys, we have the most beloved and recognizable painting in Russia, created by the artist who is the only one to have taken 2 spots in our ranking. It was painted by Vrubel 10 years before the Swan Princess, but you can already see that very recognizable style of the artist in it. Vrubel was fascinated by demons, painting 3 with the seated demon as the first. But it all started with a commission from the church to paint the Vladimir Cathedral in Kiev for the 900th anniversary of the baptism of Rus in 1888. Repin, Vasnetsov, Polenov, Surikov and others were offered this important job, but all refused. Vrubel always dreamed of creating something monumental and lasting centuries, but his sketches were rejected. They were too unlike traditional church paintings and shocked people with their dark mysticism. Though the rejection hurt the artist's pride, the urge to create a mystical painting remained. He describes the image that came to mind during this time. A half-naked, winged, young, melancholy figure sits hugging her knees at sunset, gazing at a blooming meadow with flower-laden, bending branches. In 1890, a Jubilee edition of Lermontov's poems is being prepared, with top artists contributing illustrations. Vrubel remains unknown to most, but patron Sava Morozov has already taken notice of him. He is creating a series called Tamara and the Demon, and the demonic theme is taking over his imagination. The illustrations were criticized again. Even other artists didn't understand Vrubel's dark, complex style. Doesn't this remind you of Van Gogh's story? And after the publication of the collection, Vrubel decides to paint his own demon. Not on commission, not limited by the demands of a publisher or the church, but the way he saw him when he was working on the sketch for the fresco. And that's when the sitting demon appears. He applies paint with a palette knife, creating even tiles of color, and constructing the painting like a mosaic. This unique approach creates a vibrating effect, as if we were looking at a church stained glass window. The large flowers behind the demon create the image of wings, uniting him with nature, just like the Swan Princess dissolved into the water. The demon sits and thoughtfully looks at the organizing sunset in the distance, the reflections of which are cast on his face and on the flowers of his wings. For Vrubel, the demon is not evil, but a symbol of spiritual torment and humanity. 9 years later, he will paint the flying demon as the syphilis-driven madness nearly overtakes him. The third demon, the defeated one, will appear 2 years later, completing the series and putting an end to the sad fate of perhaps the most talented and quickly burned out Russian artist. You can see it at the Tretyakov gallery. There will soon be a video about the tragic fate of this incredibly talented artist. Subscribe so you don't miss out, you won't regret it. You knew all these paintings, but I hope you were able to look at them with fresh eyes. Write your opinion in the comments, I will definitely reply to everyone, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here we talk about art simply and, most importantly, honestly. Goodbye everyone. It was this split and tragic moment in Russian history that Vasily Surikov wanted to convey.